Hey, what's up everyone? Sean here, and welcome to a new video. Now, I wanted to today to dive back into history again and kind of go through a bunch of things that I look back on just through my memories and things like that on very somewhat old technology and just stuff that existed back in the day and just things that got us to where we are now. Like they were literal little stepping stones to technology wise to many areas of technology that we have now that we don't even think about anymore. But when you look back on them, it's kind of crazy that we had to use them to get to where we are. And I picked like just a bunch of different things from different areas to make it more fun and kind of just interesting. And some of them are software, some are like actual physical things that we owned at one point in time. But again, just a fun little list I thought was that I thought back from like 20 years ago that of just things that we used for a little while. Maybe it was a few months or a couple of years, but that again they were stepping stones that are now very much gone and extinct. But and some of you may not even been alive when they actually were invented or used. But that's what makes it so much fun too. So the first thing is a device called a BlackBerry. Now, if you don't know what a BlackBerry is, it was also called a RIM, which I forget what that stands for, but that's actually an acronym for the actual company name. But the BlackBerry was really the one of the most secure. It was really a smartphone. It was a smartphone before the iPhone took over as being the current smartphone that we have now, essentially. But a BlackBerry was known for its business email, its business class, everything. I owned a few of them before iPhones existed, and they had like the really kind of crunchy, clicky keyboards that people loved quite a bit, and they were heavily used in a lot of enterprise and business ventures and businesses because of how secure they were, and they really did they invented they were kind of like the infant smartphone or like a baby smartphone, and even if you watch the very first, or I should say the keynote where Steve Jobs introduces the iPhone, the first iPhone, he actually like kind of he mocks BlackBerry essentially for being a physical keyboard back then for what they were, even though they weren't a bad thing. It's just that's just what existed back then. And they made many versions of Blackberries too. And then they even tried to do a digital one, or they tried to do one that had a clickable touchscreen, like where you actually could push on the button on the screen, and it was touchscreen. It would click in, and it was kind of like a mixture of I think it was called the BlackBerry Torch if I'm not mistaken. But it had a touchscreen that was clickable, but it was still touchscreen, and it worked pretty well. I remember using it in an AT&T store for a few minutes, and it actually worked pretty well. But again, the BlackBerry again was the most advanced smartphone before the iPhone came out for what it was, and again it was at the time the most secure thing for enterprise and businesses and things like that, and it worked really well for what it was. I don't know too much more about it, but I remember that it was there for a very long time, and again they sold a ton of them overall. Not like current smartphone stats, but for what they were for back then for a smartphone, that kind of thing. But the weird thing about them was that again, the keyboards were very small. They weren't digital at all. It was not a digital keyboard anyway yet, and the messaging was kind of clunky on it too, and it was not. It had baby internet on there too, like I said before. So again, very kind of advanced, somewhat. Again, it was a smartphone. I can't not call it one, but it had a lot of weird things, like a lot of quirks that were not anywhere near what an iPhone kind of destroyed it as. And it's funny because if there's an actual movie on Netflix, which I think is which I forget what it's called, but I watched a few weeks ago. And it was about the creation or the evolution of BlackBerry, and how, and at the very end, they even like everyone ends up leaving and quitting the company essentially, and then they even like give like a description of what happens to everyone, and basically say that basically like the company like went out of business pretty quickly after iPhones came out because of it was replaced like really easily and quickly. So, but again, it was still in my opinion a very a part of the smartphone history of legacy products, because it did get it was a stepping stone product to get to an iPhone or a smartphone in general. So BlackBerry. Now, the next one is going to be dial-up internet. Now, some of you may be laughing or like whatever in this kind of thing, but for me at least, like my entire majority, if not all, of my childhood or when I was a kid, we had dial-up internet. And if you don't know what that is, because now we have cable, and all of our phone carriers have like 5G internet that's unlimited and all that kind of stuff, but that didn't used to exist. So back in the day, I'm not gonna go with any. I'm not gonna say any years or what time frame it was, but back in the day, you actually used what was for the most which dial up, which was called DSL for the most part, and I forget what that actually stands for now, like right now. But the actual idea behind DSL was that it was where you used your phone line that was like your home phone line. You would log in or dial up to the internet, and it would have this like almost like a minute long process of dialing up onto the internet. And it would and if you know what DSL, what dial up is, or if you had it, you remember that noise where it made like a bunch of like crackling noises before it logged you in, and that was it dialing up or dialing into the internet. And back then, when it existed, the speeds were like nothing. It was maybe like 4 or 5 megabits per second, whereas now we have gigs, 2 gig speeds. Like it was insane how slow it was. And the other ironic and really funny thing about it was that it would actually, if someone called your home phone, because again we didn't have, I mean we had cell phones, but we didn't have smartphones, so it was a different thing back then. But if someone called your home phone where it was using the line to be on the internet, then it would knock you off, or at least for me it did. It would knock me off the internet of whatever I was doing, and the phone call would come through, and I would just lose connection to the internet, like just because that line was being called by someone on the phone. And so, and again, that was before anything with like cable ever existed for internet at least. And again, it was a stepping stone to get, because I mean it was internet. Things were very very slow, so it took a few minutes to load a web page. It took a few minutes to do everything on there, but it was still the internet. And I remember when we had a PC, because back then most, at least for my family, we had a family PC where we would have, I think it was like a Windows gateway computer. It was a gateway like software on it, but Windows based for the software or whatever it was, or Gateway made it back then, I think. And I would play the Yukon Trail game, if you guys remember what that that was for a game. And so, but you had to have internet access and the CD in the disk drive at the same time for it to work, and you had to have internet access for it to connect online for all of it to be fully functional. But again, whenever anyone called the home phone for where I lived, it would knock me off the game and knock me off the internet. And again, this was before any like peer-to-peer file sharing existed, so there was no, not to my knowledge at least, not yet, not on a big scale, but there was no Napster, no downloading, nothing like that yet, at least on a massive scale. Maybe if there was, nice to know about it, but again, it was just one of those things where dial-up was a thing for a very long time. And you actually, it was crazy is that you actually had to pay a lot of money for it too. I remember it was like, I think it was like $50 or $60 a month. It was very very expensive for what it was. But again, at that time, for the tech we had, where we were not, it wasn't business internet or anything like that, so it was what it was. And it's funny because I remember back then as a kid thinking and wondering if we would ever get, as a technology thing, like I was always wonder if that was as good as it was going to get from a tech standpoint. I was like, is this the fastest internet that we could ever have, like in life? And of course that changed very quickly, but it was so funny to think back to DSL, because nowadays like we can do insane things with the speeds that we have and uploading stuff like we can. But again, DSL dial-up was the thing. Now the next one is going to be that I chose for social networking. It would be MySpace. Now I know there was many other blogs and websites and social media networks that were existing before MySpace was a thing, but to me MySpace was the first real worldwide phenomenon of its kind. I know there was like things like Friendster and Tumblr and whatever else there even was out there. Like there was those hundreds of those types of websites where you could write a personal blog with text and photos, that kind of thing, and then and that would be your thing. Like, it wasn't even like a website. It was just like you'd go to that website, whatever it was, and then make a blog and post about whatever you were feeling or whatever you wanted to write about. But MySpace was the first real, I would say, online community that became what it was, and it really changed everything for technology. And it was the first place where you could go like log in with an email and a password or create a profile, whatever you want to call it, and you could customize everything about your profile. Meaning, like, you could customize your background, have a photo, have animations, have, I don't think video worked, but you could do a bunch of really cool stuff and have, if you know, and even what was really cool about MySpace to me was that if you knew a little bit about coding, like language coding, you could actually change how your profile would interact with whoever came to it, essentially, whether it was friends or whoever it was. And that was really, really rad back then for how, novel it was as an idea and as a thing. However, it also had issues too, because I remember a lot of times when I would customize the background of my profile to be like a lot of bands, like photos and things like that, and so you'd have to like customize the background, whether it was tiled, or one big image or whatever it was, and because of how big the images could be that you got or used, that it would have to like it would take a long time for it to load your profile to someone else. So that sucked. I remember that part of it. The other part about MySpace was that you could have like the whole again top friends thing, and if anyone ever used MySpace at all back in the day, you would remember that in many cases in some people's like friend groups, the whole top friends list of like 4 or 8 whatever it was became a really big, at times dramatic thing of like of who was on the list and why they were on the list, and if you changed it around, why it happened, that kind of thing. So I always remember from myself that I always had music on there, whatever I was listening to at the time, and I would just put my top favorite bands at the time in my top friends list, because you could go and like a band, obviously the same as a friend, and put them on your top friends list. And it was cool too, because on there you could also have where you could put music on your profile as well, so you could have an image in the background, have a bunch of effects on your profile website too, and also have music playing. But again, the more that you layered on and added on for your stuff, for your media on your profile, the longer it took to load up. And I remember it also being a somewhat dramatic thing where people like didn't want to wait for that to load. And it was really funny for that too. And the other really interesting thing about that was that we went from having that kind of social media, because it really was, in my opinion, the first big social media thing of its type, of a novel thing. And then Facebook came around and broke that, essentially, in a positive way, in a way where it was like Facebook like cleaned all that out. It took all the customization away from MySpace in its own version, and it was a much simpler, much more cleaner thing on its own. And I'm not gonna talk too much more about Facebook, because that's where we are now, still, for the most part, for what it is. But I wanted to say MySpace because MySpace was really, in my opinion, the first real large, massive scale social media platform for what it was, and how long it was used for, and how many people used it and what they used it for. It was really the first real thing of I would say, of positive like worldwide communication, where you could talk to people in other countries just by being on that website. It was a really rad experience for when it left, for how long it lasted for, and again how long it was customizable and all that kind of everything that was involved with it too. Now, the next thing I want to mention, that was, again, these are things that are either that were created that changed the whole thing for tech. Now, not all of these are gone now, so the next one I want to bring up is the Apple App Store. And so what I mean by that is the actual app store that you go to use on your iPhone, on your smartphone, to go and download third-party apps. And the reason why I'm choosing this as obviously it's not extinct, it's still, we use it every day for the most part, but the reason why I chose it as a thing is because when it came out on the iPhone, because again it came out on the iPhone for the first thing, nothing like that had ever been done before. Like, we obviously had computers and software and gaming, and you could put all that on your computer and install stuff with CD-ROMs and play games or listen to music and do all that on a computer. But again, the iPhone, the smartphone, nothing ever existed for a mobile experience like that. And even with Apple especially, and that's why I wanted to bring up in this video, because even when Apple was heavily, and they still are in a lot of ways, but they were heavily known for being closed source, which means, if you don't know what that means, it means that they don't allow anything of third party ever, meaning like other companies to use their stuff, and they didn't back then at all. It was like a thing where, like, even with like product announcements and that kind of thing, they would announce stuff, and then it was always a closed source software, so other companies could not really use it at all, and that's a huge reason why Apple was very non-trendy back then, I would say, or non-usable for a lot of businesses, is because businesses couldn't, Apple wouldn't allow them to install their software or use their stuff, and allow things like, whereas Microsoft back then, they were open as far as I'm aware, like they were everywhere for that reason, or IBM or anyone else, so kind of that kind of thing. But the App Store, the Apple App Store on the iPhone, was the first time ever in my experience and in my opinion that Apple was like, hey, they were like, hey, we're gonna, for the first time ever in our history of the company, on a mobile device, we're going to allow anyone, for the most part, to make an app that they want, under conditions, of course, that we approve of as a company, but allow anyone else in the world to make an app or take an idea and put it onto our store to be downloadable for free, and then people with their iPhone can download it and use it. And that was a breakthrough, because I was always wondering, because back then when the first iPhone came out, there was no App Store yet. I know it's crazy weird to hear that now, but back then, 2007, the I forget when the actual App Store came out for what it was, for when it was, but the first iPhone did not have an App Store yet. It was all Apple software. It was everything was owned by them. It was a closed source platform for iOS, and that's just the way that they had it back then. I mean, it worked. It became instantly popular for a smartphone, but there was no third-party software allowed yet. And I don't know what changed or who changed that idea or what happened, but I think Apple kind of just realized that they were not going to be, if they wanted the phone to be successful for a smartphone, that they could not be the only app developer that existed on their platform. And then of course they announced it and created and launched the App Store, and then that's when everything changed for them and for the world, because I think that the App Store was one of the biggest inventions for software, at least, that changed everything. Because even to this day, like now, again, and there's been many infinite trends of apps, like hitting huge numbers of downloads that are brand new or becoming, of course, very trendy, like TikTok, like what TikTok is now, and just all the kind of stuff that's involved with that. But the App Store was what allowed that to happen. And it's launched careers, it's launched companies, it's launched crazy. I'm not saying that none of that could have happened without the App Store, but I don't know if it would have been like as good, because I remember that when Google, or I should say when Android, not Google, my bad, when Android as an OS came out, which is open source, they allow whatever on their platform with their phone. So that's a whole different conversation by itself. But again, the Apple App Store for the iPhone was the first real novel mobile operating platform that allowed third-party developers to come on the store and launch things that they wanted to, within any kind of range of niche and interest for an app. And I remember back in the day though, like there was a big thing back then when that App Store launched, that the actual conditions of having your app approved was very, very hard. I don't know if that's loosened up a little bit over the years or not, but again, the Apple App Store, when it came out, was a very novel idea. It was very unlike Apple to do that back then. And now it's funny because it's the exact opposite now, where they do, like, they kind of let everyone test out their stuff and launch whatever they want within reason, that kind of thing. So it's a very funny, interesting switch up for like the last 25 years. So again, that's a big one right there. Now the next one is going to be the digital camera, and why I chose this device as a thing. And then they still exist obviously now, but not in any way like they used to. And what do you mean by that? A digital camera is that before digital cameras were a thing, essentially, we had the old school, the throwaway, like the temporary cameras, whatever they're called, where you would go buy a camera at like Target or wherever it was for like $5 or $10. It had, I think, like 24 or 30 shots in it with a flash and the camera. You'd take the shots of whatever you were doing, and then you had to bring it to Walgreens, I think it was, or whatever store it was, to give it to them. You have to pay for the development of the photos, or disposable camera is what it was called. But yeah, you have to pay for the development of the photos, wait a few days possibly, or it was like a 1 hour processing time sometimes if you're lucky, and then you have no idea what you shot yet. You didn't know how good it looked, or if it looked good at all, if it was in focus. You had no idea. But the disposable camera was what we had before. And I have no idea what brand did it first. I don't know anything like that. Maybe it was probably Sony or something like that, but I don't know who was first at it. But then the digital camera came out, where you could buy a memory card and buy a camera with a lithium-ion battery. I think it was back then. I'm not sure honestly, but then you could take a photo with it, and they had and back then there was no viewfinder in there. Like, I think the disposable cameras did actually have a viewfinder where you could look through and see what you were shooting. Even though most of us didn't, or at least I didn't. But on the first digital cameras, you had a flash, you had maybe a zoom out lens, not a replaceable one or whatever, but a zoom out lens with a very bad focal point usually. And then you could take a photo, and then there was a screen on the back of the camera that would show you what you just took, and then you could erase it if you didn't like it. And so that camera itself, for what it was the first real novel camera of its type, where it was for the first time where you had instant image processing. Again, the cameras were horrible, but again, when they were brand new, it was the coolest thing ever, because you could take a photo, see what it was right away, and if you liked it, you can keep it, and if you didn't like it, you could delete it and be done with it, with the memory cards being erasable and overwritable. And that camera itself was a big stepping stone. Again, it didn't last forever at all, but a big stepping stone to having a mobile phone camera, where you just have a camera app in your phone, launch it from the home screen or go to the app, and then just bam, shoot. But the digital camera itself, for many years, I think, before, I don't remember, again, I have no idea when they came out or what brand or company did them first or whatever, but there was many years where they were the camera to use for a mobile camera. And there was many of them that came out with video eventually, and there's a lot of really cool, somewhat advanced things and features that came out with those cameras before the iPhone took over with the camera. So I just wanted to mention that one too, because it was a really big deal back then when it came out, when they weren't super expensive. They were maybe like $200 or $300, $400 or whatever it was, and they worked pretty well overall. They didn't crash on you. They had pretty good systems for what they were. But again, they were a really big deal back when they existed, before the smartphone camera took over. The next one I wanted to mention, which is the last one for this list, I'll maybe do another video like this in the future, was for the websites. Yeah, the websites of Ask Jeeves and MapQuest. Now these are both before Google existed, or before Google was a popular thing or used like it is now. But if you don't know what these are, Ask Jeeves, the way I used to search for it, which was AJ.com back in the day. Ask Jeeves was a very novel, first of its kind, in my opinion, version of Google search. And basically, you would go to AskJeeves.com, and the website was kind of like a butler of a website, where it would show like a photo of a butler, where Jeeves was a butler, where he was like serving you information, essentially, to my memory of it. And you would type in a search thing of whatever it was, whether it was a location or reviews or whatever it was back then, and you could search for it, and the results were pretty good, pretty accurate, not great. It was not, it was nothing like what Google was when it came out, but it was, to my knowledge, it was like one of the first search engines that did as well as it did for when it came out, and it worked really well. And then in concurrence with that, I would say, was MapQuest.com. Now again, if you don't know what that is, MapQuest, if it's not obvious, MapQuest was I would say one of the first, if not the first, digital mapping system, where you could go online on your computer, go to MapQuest.com, and type in an address or a business or whatever it might be, and search for a place to go to, and then you could print. You had print it off at the time, but you could print off the mapping directions of where you were going. And so it was literally just a paper version of step-by-step directions from where you were to where you were going, and reversal of that. And again, this was before smartphones existed of that type. There was no Google yet. There was no Google Maps, no mapping of any kind digitally, so you couldn't download it anywhere. But you could get a printable version of it. You could print it off and bring it with you. The hard part, for me at least, the hard part about MapQuest was that if you went the wrong way or took a wrong turn somewhere, which are the same thing, but anything like that, you could not get, obviously, the automatic redirect. So you kind of had to have a somewhat decent mapping knowledge of where you were in some cases, which is hard to do in a lot of cases when you've never been to a place before. So I remember like taking a wrong turn in some places, or being like you know, like kind of like maybe like sketched out in traffic somewhere, and I'd miss a turn or miss a sign or miss a direction to go to, and then because you have all you have is a paper direction step by step, like you'd have to figure it out. So it was just fun. It was an interesting thing for what it was, and again, none of that. There was no smartphones yet, to my knowledge, back then, or they didn't work very well for what it was. So I remember excuse me, I remember Ask Jeeves being my primary search tool for information, as well as MapQuest.com, and then the other one I'll throw in here, which I wasn't going to mention, but I just remembered it, would be for MoviePhone. If you remember MoviePhone was the very, very early, if not the first, but the very early version of a phone only, so an audio only phone version of what Fandango has become pretty much. Like, I mean, nowadays we have, of course, apps everywhere for where you can get whatever theater app you have, or you go to your theater website. But MoviePhone was where you could call in on your phone, and there would be an automated voice, and they would literally update. It was an automated voice, and you could tap in what movie you wanted to see, your zip code, and then just get showtimes. You couldn't buy tickets to there, I don't believe, but for what it did for you, for getting showtimes, which is all it was good for, but it was still cool that it did that, and having it be over the phone and being up to date constantly, that things were sold out or whatever it was, it worked really well. And so again, to me, that period of time when we had internet, basic internet, we had DSL internet, we had basic minimal functionality for everything. And so it was a really interesting time to be alive or living that as a kid, because of the fact that we had technology in its infancy, and we didn't know, or at least I didn't know, we didn't know if it would become better at the time. Like, we just thought it was cool that we had it. And I think it's a very, very different environment and world, obviously, now for sure, where things change instantly within seconds, or things are announced every year that are mind blowing, or at least they used to be. But back then, when Ask Jeeves and MapQuest and MoviePhone were all things that were very popular, and they were one of the bigger or the easier to use sources to get details of information for either directions or mapping things out for whatever, or searching for information, or just getting movie tickets. Those are what we had. And again, they were very cool. They were very rad for what they did. They were very novel. They didn't always work. They didn't always give out correct information, but they were better than having everything be flat out just going showing up in person to a movie theater and hoping that things weren't sold out, or just getting it, or having to using an old school map and hope for the best on getting where you're going. So that was, I don't know, I just wanted to make a video about that because I thought it was a cool thing to look back on, things that are obviously no longer in existence, and they're very, very much extinct for the most part, but just seeing how far we've gone, how far we've grown as humanity, and just to see how, not how bad things were back then, but just where we started with technology from a massive commercial consumer standpoint to where we are now. It's insane to me. So yeah, I just wanted to make a video to highlight a few things. I can make another video like this if you want that. So let me know in the comments if you want more videos like this of old stuff that doesn't exist anymore, and just how old it used to be before we had what we have now. But yeah, if you enjoyed the video at all, give it a thumbs up, and of course subscribe for more. Thanks for watching as always, and I will see you all in the next one.